Based on the views of existing videos, it seems like there's a lot of interest in generational trauma. And so I thought what we might do is talk about that a little bit more today, kind of have maybe a fuller discussion on that. And
hmm
so to kick things off, to start off, as people kind of join, can you just remind everyone what is generational trauma?
Okay. So I'll talk about generational trauma from my point of view. There are books written on it. Probably the most famous one is The Body Keeps the Score. So intergenerational trauma states that if your parents or grandparents, or even yourself, went through a trauma as a child, and a trauma is an event or series of events over time in which your body goes through the physiological response of thinking it's going to die or going into an extreme anxiety state of, possibly due to a car accident or surviving a fire or physical abuse, or it could be emotional abuse. So that's what a trauma is. And of course, it causes all these feelings to come up. But in order for you to sort of, I don't want to say heal, but you have to be able to complete the cycle of the feelings that came up out of that event, all of them, especially the fear, depression, anger, whatever feelings you think might come up as a result of a person going through a trauma as a child. And if you don't, because no one knows how to show you how to do this, or you just hide it from everybody, you push it down, though that trauma event gets stuck in the body because trauma has been shown to affect you on a cellular level, a biological cellular level. It causes all your cells to get jittery. And so as a child, so the reason it's passed along mostly as a child is because you haven't hit reproductive age yet. All these cells begin multiplying. You start to grow up as a person, and then your body hits reproductive age. And so now every cell that was multiplied and is affected by that original trauma back when you were 7 or 4 years old or something like that now gets into your genetic material and you just pass it along. And this has been proven biologically in lab mice. This has been proven in certain groups of people, like Jewish people coming from Europe after the Holocaust. It's been documented that their descendants have higher degrees of anxiety and depression than the average population because of intergenerational trauma. So you basically pass it along to your children. And the trauma usually happens when you're a kid. That's what generational trauma is. Yeah.
And so a lot of people who are suffering from generational trauma don't even maybe even realize that they're suffering from it. They are just anxious or they just have maybe certain behaviors. Is that right?
Correct. Totally correct. Yes. So
Yeah.
people like, what's it, the guy's name who wrote The Body Keeps the Score? Did I pronounce his name right?
Gabramate?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So he said everybody has had trauma from his
Mm.
point of view. Because trauma is, again, where your body goes into an extreme anxiety or response of thinking it's going to die. Like, oh no, here it is. You can go through that as a child without you even realizing it happened or your parents realizing it happened. And
Mhm.
if you are already born with a jittery nervous system, then you are more likely to get traumatized than an average person over things that average people wouldn't get traumatized over. So when I talked to this young woman who was 26 who had an eating disorder and alcoholism, when I asked her what her trauma was, she said it was when my mother wouldn't pay for ballet lessons. And so her parents were like, I don't think that's it. No, it's nothing. I'm blaming parents and all, but they just were
Mm.
sort of surprised that this was the thing that she kept on harping on and stuff. But that's what it's like. And so they asked me, is it a trauma? And I'm like, well, the trauma is not based on our categorizations of trauma. It's based on, does your body go into a trauma response when this thing happens? Like, then it's a trauma, unfortunately.
And so the issue in that example was when her parents wouldn't pay for her ballet lessons, it meant that they didn't care for her, didn't love her, weren't going to provide for her. Like, is that
Yeah.
what triggered?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So when a trauma happens, your body goes through a death response. The mind, especially as a child, does not understand it. It doesn't understand death. It's scary. So like I remember when we would have our daughter when she was 4 years old watch movies that we thought were okay, like Madagascar, Disney stuff, but it was maybe a little bit too scary for her. She would, after the movie, begin to repeat the traumatic parts. So really what happened to the Little Mermaid was she's okay, right? And she just kept on, yes, she's okay because they defeated the bad person, da 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 da, but she's okay, right? And I realized she's been through trauma because her mind is continuing to repeat something and is not listening to me when I'm saying she's okay. And so I'm realizing like her mind is trying to process something it doesn't understand. And she got scared and it was just trying to calm itself. And so that's why these stories of, oh, my parents didn't care about me. Um, I never got what I wanted. Even though those are negative thoughts, it makes sense to the mind's structure, and so it calms itself. It's trying to calm itself down, basically. But in doing so, it only enforces the belief.
Yeah. It's interesting because my daughter, when she was very young, I don't know if you ever watched this, but Hallmark had a holiday kind of video called Jingle the Husky Pup. So basically, it's about this little husky pup that kind of loses its family. And it was very like it's like I guess I didn't realize it, but she was very affected by it.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
and I thought when we were watching it, I thought it was because the volume was too loud and it was scary or something. But now that you say that, I think what happened was is she was watching this video. This husky pup is abandoned by its family, accidentally abandoned by its family, and he's all alone, like in the world, trying to figure out how to find them, how to get back.
Yeah, yeah.
And she's crying. And then, now I realize, man, that was probably traumatic for her,
Yeah. I mean, who
to watch this
here,
video.
you're right. And who here, we're looking at it from our daughter's point of view, but being adults, but who here as an adult was not traumatized by the death of Bambi's mother? Like,
Yeah.
I remember the scene clearly, what it sounded like. I don't remember a lot of the other movie. I remember that.
Yeah,
And
that's
or I
something kid.
remember violent parts of the animated movie from the 70s, Watership Down. Like
Oh yeah.
we
The
watched that.
rabbits.
My mother thought, oh, it's about rabbits. And then the ending is like, oh my gosh. There's blood everywhere. I remember those scenes. I don't remember a lot of the other movie and stuff. So that, your body goes through a little bit of a trauma. And so I should say this though. So when you have these unresolved traumas as a child, it's been shown that that contributes to when your child is born, they are now more at risk for having mental health conditions that have emotional dysregulation as a key feature, like ADHD, autism, bipolar, schizophrenia, PTSD. The generational trauma definitely contributes to that brain being born into the world like that. And so maybe that young woman with the ballet lessons was already, you know, was
Mhm.
born with these mental health conditions that made her mind overly sensitive in the first place. And then she goes through something that the parents didn't realize what was happening in her brain and
Yeah,
stuff.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way her parents would realize the significance of that, like how serious and, how much of a
Yeah.
perceived threat that might be. It
Yeah.
doesn't seem
And
like
I
a big a
talked to
deal.
the parents and they're, very loving. They were there talking to me because they were there for her daughter. They cared about her. They wanted to figure this out and help her out with her addictions and stuff like that. So they were good people. It's just they didn't know.
Yeah.
They didn't realize. That's why Gabor Mate says, like, everybody's been through a trauma pretty much. So, and that's a good topic I want to bring up is, so when you talk about generational trauma, these mental health conditions, anxiety, depression, many times I hear, which is understandable, oh, I have anxiety. Or who doesn't have
Hmm.
that kind of problem? Which
Hmm.
is very, very true. And then what I say is, you're right. I I'm not explaining myself properly, and I'm doing a disservice to people who have these conditions because I'm not explaining it properly. When you have generational trauma and even these mental health conditions, autism, ADHD, PTSD, none of this is a problem unless it has a problem with your functioning. And usually, you have a problem functioning in two areas. At work, your work is suffering. You
Hmm.
can't stay focused. You get too stressed out easily. You don't perform as well. And at home, in your intimate relationships with your family, constantly getting into arguments, blaming people. The relationships are very tumultuous at home and stuff. So when it gets to that point, and maybe you're losing jobs a lot. Like there was a time when I was quitting jobs every 6 months for like a 2 to 3 year period. My ex had to point it out, like, you quitting again? And it was because I was getting traumatized in every single job that I was going into. So that's, becoming to be a problem. So when it gets to the point where it's a problem, then yes, I would suggest to get help. But if you get to the or if you have these things and you're working fine, you're functional, you're having good family relationships, you know, um, then you may have generational trauma, but it's not necessarily a problem.
Yeah. But I think you have said that you have suffered through the effects of that. So your generational trauma, if has affected you, and I think continues to affect you.
Yes.
You're still experiencing that. Can you talk about like how it affects you kind of in your everyday life and what do you do about it?
Yeah. So first, I want to say that if anybody's listening here and they want to type a comment in here, we're looking at the comments, so I will respond. I want this to be an interactive live stream as much as possible. And there's, my goal in having this conversation is not just to chat, but it's to help people. So if you have a question in which you can sort of relate, can you please help me out and explain this further? We'll stop this little talk and try to address it the best we can. And of course, please stay on topic as much as you can. Thank you. So here's a really good example. An average event that could happen to people, dropping your kid off at college. So dropping a kid off at college can create the empty nest syndrome if that's, the only child or the last child to be dropped off at college. So many people would say, "Oh yeah, I that happened to me." And yeah, it was hard, it was sad, it was depressing even. Um, you know, so a lot of people go through this. But when you're an inheritor of severe generational trauma that's severe enough to be born with ADHD, autism, and PTSD like me, and then you've already gone through traumatic events in your childhood. I've been divorced, so that was a trauma for me. Then something like this happens. Now I'm totally alone. Depression wasn't the word. It was like feeling the pain of my entire family abandoning me again. And so I'm 55 years old. This body's 55 years old. The feeling inside was like a 7-year-old child walking around a house where he's lived at, in which the family suddenly disappeared, never to be seen again. And so the fear, the depression, it was really, really, really intense to the point where, I couldn't function. I had to like slow down even making these videos. I had to slow down my work pace. I had to just accept you're just going to have to meditate or take walks more, just sit there more in these next few days, weeks, months, because, it'll bring up such intense emotion compared to an average person that you can't function. So many people will say, well, yeah, it's harder for me to work when I went through that. Couldn't function. I mean, just sitting there for hours, not being able to do anything, not even clean the dishes or something. So that's what I mean when this affects you. It's really, really strong like this. And I should say I'm a person who's a recovering alcoholic, recovering marijuana addict. There was definitely thoughts in there of drinking, like just who cares about the sobriety? I just want to drink. But yeah, the thoughts were, they were there. They were very, very, very weak. It was very, very weak. In the end, I definitely wanted to experience my sorrow and my sadness over sedating it with alcohol, but they were there. Yeah.
What was your feeling, sending a child to college because you had, I mean, obviously through divorce and kind of losing your family, that was the heart of it. But linking back to, was there something previously earlier than that that also informed this feeling, or, kind of led to this? Did you ever feel abandoned as a child, or is it really the divorce and then having your daughter go to college that really reminded you that you're alone, and that was the trauma being revisited? Like how far back does it go?
Yeah. So my family never abandoned me in terms of my childhood. Never got divorced.
Mhm.
Um, they were always there for me. I should say that.
Okay.
Never had hardships financially, times when we didn't think we could eat that week. None of that happened. It's just that this body was born ADHD and autistic and had a propensity for PTSD.
Hmm.
And then my mother, I don't blame her, but she was just carrying through the consequences of generational trauma, not knowing what was going on with any of us, and went through, the abuse cycle that you usually pass on to your children. And so now I felt even more jittery that it triggered the PTSD. So what I'm saying is just having those conditions, ADHD, autism, PTSD, it not only affects your emotions, it affects your executive functioning.
Hmm.
So this body makes decisions poorly on key things that could cause fatality problems. Like, so people like me, because of these executive functioning issues, we're at higher risk of dying in accidents at home. And I've definitely experienced things like that where I'm doing something just totally boneheaded. Like, what are you doing sticking a screwdriver into a light socket? Like things like that. Things that you would normally, like a 12-year-old would know not to do this. Or the executive functioning also affects your just how long it takes you to do something. So if you were to give me, like I remember when I bought a grill and I asked the person at the hardware shop, how long did it take you to put together? 30, 45 minutes, no problem. It took me 4 hours because I don't read instructions well. So, and that's pretty common. That's why, honestly, I didn't really do a lot of home improvement around this house. Putting in a lighting fixture would take like 4 times longer, and then I would get frustrated and stuff on top of that. So what I'm saying is my body almost intuitively knew you're going to have problems surviving and thriving with a brain like this. You don't
Hmm.
function the kind of decisions that you make and when you make them is just really has poor decision making. But I was just doing this ad nauseum over and over again. Like, and my body doesn't learn how to do it properly most of the time. And so we're not really good at planning things. We're not really good at making goals in time that would take small action steps to get to that goal that would take maybe a couple of years. We're not good with that stuff. And so
Yeah.
when the family abandons you and that feeling of it isn't just I lost my family. There's a terror that comes up because my body intuitively sort of knows you don't survive and thrive well without family community around you. It
Mm.
just intuitively knows this, and thus it brings up this fear. That's what I was walking around with to this day. I was walking around like that.
So, I mean, intellectually and factually, you can survive. You are surviving on your own, but it was just a feeling. Like, you just feel, intuitively you feel for your survival or you're afraid. How am I gonna make
No,
it?
no, this is good. Yeah, to go deeper into this. Yes, I do surviving. I'm single. I'm alone. I'm here. So, yeah, buy groceries, take care of the car, do house maintenance, things like that. So, but that's the most in terms of my body's anxiety levels can handle, to tell you the truth. So I don't go out that much. So what the family gave me before the divorce was this feeling of I'm finally a normal person. I go out on vacations. We have friends that we see on weekends. We have parties. Like I feel like a normal person that's grounded and stable and can afford to have problems, but because there's somebody there. I just felt so grounded and normal when my family was there because my wife at the time was taking care of everything so much that I didn't even know the degree of dysfunction and emotionality my body had until the whole family was taken away. And then I realized the executive functioning issues, the emotional issues. And so I don't go out that much. I survive here, but I didn't thrive as much as that. And I was thriving like that for 20 years, 20, 25 years. And so all the memories of vacations, just, feeling like a family, like you don't realize how much it takes up in your time. You're like, what are we going to do for dinner? What are we going to do tomorrow? Everything's all about the family and stuff.
Yeah.
And so when that whole identity, the whole thing was taken away, my identity was taken away.
Yeah. Because you identified as a husband, as a father, that was your identity.
Yeah,
And
that was, if you
now,
asked who Mike was,
yeah.
I would give you that story. I'm a father, husband. I work as a drug counselor. I have a daughter who's in her teenage year. Yeah, I live in Rhode Island. I'm a homeowner. I would mention all the things around the identity of this person, which is basically a story, but
Hmm.
it was believed in so much that I have a video about this. it acted like a psych med. The most stabilizing thing for my mental health was my family, my marriage and my family. Not any psych med, not any kind of therapy, not even spirituality and retreats that I would go, these weekend retreats that I would go to. Feeling like I had a stable family to give me normalcy, that belief in that story, that's what stabilized this system the most. So without it, I'm seeing the executive functioning issues, the emotionality issues in this.
Hmm. And with all the work that you've done, you still have those feelings, those emotions. You still have that maybe feeling of being alone or feeling like you
Yeah,
need
it's still
others.
there. Oh, there's a, it's when, so this isn't just now based on the story. This is based on this body's survival. So the body is a survival mechanism, the physical body trying to survive in the environment, just like any other animal. It's like a body knowing that it's not adept at these things as other bodies are and stuff. And so it's not just a story and an emotional attachment to it. It's actually combined with the physical survival of an animal body in
Mhm.
its environment. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What's interesting is that you recognize these things.
Yes.
You know this intellectually, and yet it's still something that affects you. Just
Yes.
rationalizing it is not enough for you
It's
to
not enough.
realize.
Yeah, because ADHD and autism are genetically inherited neurophysiological conditions that affect your amygdala. It affects your brain functioning, affects your neurochemistry. So we don't have enough dopamine, which helps you to focus and feel relaxed. Um, our amygdalas, we have more nerve cells than an average amygdala, so therefore it's more jittery. That's the lizard part of the brain. And so it was seen because I was trying to do all of these things to stop this over emotionality that was ruining my marriage and stuff that my ex was getting sick of, and it wasn't going away. And I should say this, one of the main reasons why I suffered for so long is because I didn't even know that I was ADHD and autistic until I was 50. So here I am surviving with my wife because of her for decades, thinking that I had an average brain without these executive functioning and emotional impulse control problems in this brain. And I was masking the entire time. And I should say that, that was why I was drinking so much. The body was being taxed beyond its limit because it was ADHD and autistic and PTSD, trying to live an average, normal life like everybody else, earning a paycheck, paying for a mortgage, paying for your kids' school. And it was too much for that brain to take. And so when I would come back home, I would drink and take naps. I had like four main addictions that I would take part in, sometimes all at the same time, every single day, just to calm down and stuff. I don't do those things anymore, but my life is different now. So, yeah.
Can you talk about if someone recognizes that they suffer from generational trauma, there are different things that they can do, different, treatments or different modalities. So you could go to therapy or you could engage in some kind of mindfulness practice.
Yeah.
Can you
And
talk
I've
about
done
the
all of
different
them.
ways? Yeah, can you talk about how the different ways might help people in that situation? What are the pros and cons, or how do certain things help or not help, or why would certain, techniques be better or worse than others?
So I would say if I was to ever work with someone, so in my main role as a coach, I, I work as a coach. I work with families dealing with addiction in their home, addiction and severe behavioral issues from mental health in their homes. So these parents are not necessarily the people who aren't functional. It's their kids, their adult children. Sometimes they ask me to coach them and stuff, and I tell the parents, well, here's what I would tell your child to do. I would say you have to make a priority of stabilizing on your emotional and mental health first. That has to be the most important thing in this whole thing. If you want to not have it this affect your life as much as it has, that has to be the main priority. So when you say, what is the most helpful thing? There's no one thing that's the most helpful thing. The only main helpful thing is keeping your motivation to maintain your mental and emotional health the number one priority in your life for the rest of your life. So I've done psych meds, therapy, spiritual retreats, diet, sleep, exercise, supplements, meditation, changing religions, changing jobs, changing careers, support groups. Every time I mention these things, there's always someone that says, "Well, you didn't try this." I have. I've been doing this since 1995. And for the purpose of, I was trying to get rid of what I didn't realize was a genetically inherited neurophysiological condition. I was trying to get rid of the autism and the ADHD and the PTSD. I was trying to get rid of something that my brain is naturally shaped like. Yeah.
Hmm. It seems that because your brain chemistry, the way you're wired, is informed by what happened in the past. Therapy, you're trying to understand the story, maybe deconstruct it, process whatever happened, cognitively understand, and then make sense, and then maybe move on, or at least, internalize what happened.
Hmm.
Whereas some of the mindfulness practices and kind of the emotional energy work that you do is more just being with that energy, um,
Yeah.
maybe allowing it to dissipate, allowing it to resolve itself in a different way, not in a cognitive way, but more of an emotional, experiential way.
Yeah, I saw in another video once that they're finding that traditional talk therapy is actually not helpful for trauma or even detrimental.
Mm.
Because so when a trauma happens, it changes the way your brain is operating. And whatever belief comes out of that trauma, like I deserve the abuse that I got, or something like that, or I am less than other people and I should be subordinate to other people. Those are beliefs that children end up with when they go through a trauma just to deal with the situation. Their brain comes up with this automatically. If you just go through traditional trauma therapy, it's going to start just enforcing these stories. And all it does is just enforce the neural connections. So, as I said, you have these genetically inherited neurophysiological conditions. Your brain is still what they call plastic. It can still form new neural net connections, still change and be remolded to a certain degree, right? So, and that's where you can greatly, greatly reduce the behaviors and thoughts and feelings that are causing a problem in your life. I always hesitate to use the word healing because my understanding of generational trauma is that it's not a problem. It's not a mistake. It's not a scourge that needs to be gotten rid of. I don't want anybody to think that they're sick, ill, broken, dysfunctional, and that you need quote unquote healing. There are things that you can do to reduce the effects of this that are causing a problem in your life. So one of the main kinds of therapies that they're finding, which is what the protocol in these accounts do, is you go through and reprocess what happened, or even this event with my daughter going to college, but you do it from a very mindfulness-based state. So you're always staying in the present moment while you're doing it. You're not allowing your imagination to run wild. And whoever is working with you shouldn't allow that either, because it's just going to end up enforcing these neural net connections of I'm a victim, this terrible thing happened to me. And the brain almost ends up reliving it. But when you make sure that the attention is equally placed in the present moment, and there's certain therapies that do this, EMDR is one of them, ACT is another one. DBT is for borderline, there was designed for people with borderline personality disorder, but it has a lot of mindfulness exercises in it. And the coaching protocol that was developed here that I do does the same thing. It allows you to process through the emotions that should have been processed back then, but doing it in a very mindful, present-minded state. When you do that, now what they're showing is that that causes new neural connections to be made. Your brain actually changes shape and it doesn't use the same stories that are reinforcing those, troubling emotions.
Yeah, can you explain something? You mentioned that talk therapy can be harmful in causing people to relive trauma. And then, for example, you said a child's brain might make up some stories. I'm less than others. I don't deserve love, whatever.
Yeah.
Is that a protective mechanism? Like,
Yeah.
is it a way to make sense of the world, to rationalize the situation they're in? Like, why would someone's brain go to that and have
Yeah, I
create
would say so.
that
Yeah.
story?
So understand that when you're a child, again, your body, it's an animal body that's trying to survive. So it runs a lot by intuition and knowing what it needs. So when you're a child, like, from the ages of 1 through 15, the body sort of intuitively knows I need a community to survive, especially below the age of 10. And so, but when you're in an abusive situation with adults that are controlling you and abusing you, and they're really not seeing what they're doing and they're continuing to do that, your body still has to survive this situation. And this is why kids from backgrounds like this become addicts or they commit suicide. Their mind just can't take it. But the mind can be resilient and come up with a story that makes all of this abuse make sense. One of the stories is, I deserve it.
Mm.
I got my mom mad. She said I got her mad. Thus, when you get somebody mad, when you do something wrong to get somebody mad, you deserve to be punished. That was the belief. Now, did I consciously say that to myself over? No, it all happened in the background. It all happened subconsciously. Or my needs don't count. I always have to place myself in second or even below other people. Thus I work with people who have these uncontrollable people-pleasing behaviors that are constantly putting themselves below their needs, below other people's needs, because that's the belief that their brain grew up with in an abusive environment like that. Obviously, my needs don't count. Everybody else's needs are more important than mine.
And it's a survival mechanism. It's how you get through the day, how you
Yeah. I mean,
continue.
what are you going to do? Like, you're abusing me. You're 7 years old. You're abusing me. I'm leaving. I thought about that, definitely. I mean, I'm pretty sure many kids do think of running away. But it's like executive functioning wise, my emotionality, I knew I'm not going to survive out there. I'm like 7 or 8, 9 years old. And so it's better to come up with a belief system that makes you handle it all. Now, the
Yeah.
problem is all of this is subconscious and it then affects the rest of your life, especially when you get married or when you have your relationships with your friends or your wife or something like that. You still have that same belief system operating in the background.
Yeah. In that situation, if I don't imagine we have young, kind of kids watching this, but maybe there are people around those younger, adults, younger children. What are the kinds of things that we should be doing to help them understand this better? What could you do to help them
Young
live better?
people,
Well, so maybe if people are watching this video, understanding, oh, this is actually what's going on. Don't do that. Don't abuse, people. So that's the first thing. But if you're trying to help a niece or a nephew who's kind of in a bad situation, or something where you have now an intuition or an understanding of what might be happening, how can you help the younger person in that situation so they don't blame themselves, so they don't think less of themselves, so they understand, they're deserving of love. Is there anything that can be done to help them in that situation to lessen their suffering and to maybe get them framing it or having a different perspective so they don't
yeah,
suffer
that's a very
needlessly?
difficult situation because they're stuck in it, right? If that's what you're saying, if the
Yeah.
abuse is coming from home, from the adults that are supposedly they're living with and supposedly supposed to be taking care of them, they're stuck in it. So I'd say the main thing that would be helpful is to show the child that you are of utmost important to the world and to me and to us, that we have to extricate you from this situation or talk to the parents.
Yeah.
Like,
I think
let
talking to
this
the
thing
parents,
stop.
trying
Yeah,
to end
if
that
that's the
abuse.
case. Like it'd be hard for a child to continue to have different, you know, it's not your mother's fault. She doesn't, she has mental health issues. It's not your fault, but they're still going home and experiencing the abuse.
Hmm.
And that onslaught may be too much for that mind to take. And actually that kind of thought might not even be helpful because what is it going to lead the kid to do? Rebel more,
Hmm.
in a situation like that. So
So maybe for us as adults, when we look back on what we experienced, now we can better understand maybe why our parents acted the way they did or
yeah.
understand
So
our
getting back
own.
to generational trauma, there's two ways to pass it on. Genetically, which we've discussed extensively, and experientially. If you don't know what happened to you and you're too emotional, reactive, blamey, always, not taking responsibility for yourself because that's the way you were treated, you can easily end up physically and emotionally abusing your child for years because you don't know what's going on with you. You don't even see what's happening as a problem and
Hmm.
stuff. So, you know, luckily, my daughter inherited half my brain, like every kid does, half the child, a father's, mother's brain. And so I can see that she has my jittery emotional nervous system, and we've even had her assess her autism and ADHD twice, and both results were like negative, thank God. But I can see that she has an edgy nervous system. She has anxiety. She gets edgy very quickly. She takes things personally. That's like me and stuff. So I could see that she has these features. That she just didn't get the full diagnosis. And so what's really important growing up was I made sure that she didn't go through the abuse that I went through. Because on top of having a sensitive brain like that, if she went through the same kind of abuse that I went through, I don't know, maybe she'd be a drug addict today, or suicidal
Mhm.
today. So I made sure that, you know, I wanted her to succeed, be functional, be happy in life. And so I did a good 10, 12 years of personal self-help recovery therapy work before I even had a child to make sure I didn't, and my ex did too, to make sure that we didn't do that to her.
Mm.
Yeah.
And so a lot of because of the work that you've done, I would imagine that many of the people that you've worked with, this is revelatory or they're learning things they didn't know. How did that change how they interacted with people around them, and what was the effect of that? Once they realized that they, had their own anxiety, they had these unresolved emotions, and it was manifesting itself in how they were treating their loved ones or acting with them. Once they understood that, how did that help? Were they able to resolve those issues? And maybe some of that was caused by generational trauma. Did it improve their relationships with other people? And
Yeah.
if so,
So
how?
I work again, like I said, with parents dealing with addiction and severe mental health and behaviors in their home. Again, this is generational trauma, right? The parents have it too. They're just more functional. So I could see clearly where the child gets it from. The difference is that child did not genetically inherit the DNA allele for resilience, where the parent did. The parent may even have just as severe emotional issues as the kid did, but they're more in control of their behaviors. Thus, they were able to have even very good jobs. College professors, engineers, lawyers. I work with doctors, PhD therapists, but their child's a mess because they didn't inherit that allele. So when I talk to the parents, yes, the issues with their child is triggering all of these past unresolved emotions that they have in there. And so it's affecting their relationships. So if I can or they can use talk coaching or talk therapy and have their behaviors change permanently in terms of their interactions with their child instead of getting into fights all the time, they're more understanding, peaceful, and compassionate. Just to be talking about it, great. Lots of times they can't. Lots of times they can't because they have unresolved trauma, unresolved core emotions in there that are driving the entire. They say, I try to talk to my child more calmly, but every time he says this thing, guilt comes up and I give in all the time. Or when she yells at me, I just get all defensive and start yelling back. I know what you said. I know I shouldn't be doing this, but I can't stop myself. So when I hear that, then I realize, well, I should say, I always say, like, you should get mental health services. You should get, be assessed for by psychiatry, therapy, get other services. Don't just use this protocol. But I realize, like, you need to resolve these core emotions that are driving this impulsive behavior that you have when you interact with them. That's what the protocol does. It dissolves all of that, most of it, that kind of emotional, unresolved energy that's constantly getting triggered in that difficult situation with their adult child.
Yeah. And helping then the
So what they
parent or
tell me is,
whoever.
yeah, so what they tell me is, first of all, they sometimes they feel a shift. So the protocols that I'm talking about that we're talking about are all in this account. I put them all up there so you can do it yourself. And obviously there's safety protocols and you should definitely be using other mental health and spirituality meditation services. I wouldn't just do this by itself, but it's designed to complement everything, right? It's not designed to replace it. It's just designed to complement it. But when people go through it, you can even see in the comments on the TikTok account, they'll say like, wow, that was amazing. My energy shifted before the meditation was done. Or I can see at the end of the meditation, wow, that really resolved that. I just needed somebody to help me out with it, but I knew what I needed to do that was really, really helpful. This is amazing. And when I read comments like that, I realize there was an emotional resolution there. Some blocked core emotion shifted, and it only took like 20 minutes. 30 minutes. When I work with somebody individually, I do it. It can take up to 2 hours. But I've had people do it, have it shifts in groups. And so when you have this shift, you internalize and resolve the blocked core motion. Basically, what all it does is, like we said before, it brings up a mindfulness presence state, which is the universal energy, and then it just allows the body to complete the cycle of the emotion. Until when it's done, and they say after the session, yes, I feel more peaceful over this topic, over this situation. And I could see that they had a shift. Usually they look much more relaxed about the topic when they talk about it at the end. I check on it to make sure it worked, was effective for them. And then I talk about the topic again with them, and they just look more relaxed about it. They're not uptight. They usually come in like this, and then they end up talking like this about it. But the most important part is when I follow up with them a few days, a few weeks, even months later, how is it when you have that triggering conversation with your adult son now with the mental health issues? Are you still yelling back? Are you still giving in because you get all jittery? And the majority of them, actually, like I want to say 90, 95% of them say no. It's much better. What I get is like the majority of them, their tension is reduced at least 50%. And they say, I feel a little bit of that anxiety come up, but not enough to control my behavior. I don't give in anymore. And I'm calm, even when they're yelling at me. So that's what they notice. That's the change.
Yeah, let me push you on this because earlier in the conversation, you were talking about your daughter going to college, and this is, resurfacing a lot of these emotions and the difficulties, and it's hard for you, to go
Yeah.
through that. Knowing everything that you know, practicing those techniques, and being fully aware of those things is not equal to actually achieving that same sense of peace and inner harmony and all that. Can you explain, like, even though you know all those things, you yourself were in that
I'm the
situation.
one who created the protocol.
Yeah, and you also still feel those feelings when your daughter is going to college. Like how do you reconcile that? You know that what you
No,
should
no, this,
do.
yeah. So this goes back to the generational trauma thing that we're talking about. All mental health issues, depression, anxiety, PTSD, all of it, all of the borderline personality disorder, all of it, it's all on a spectrum of severity, right? And so, say you have people with mental health issues here, but they're in the functioning spectrum. They can have jobs. They can generally have stable families. They can save money. Usually people like us were terrible at money. But as you move along the severity, it's going to hit a point where you're not functional. You don't have the resilience. You're not able to, the mental health issues and the behavioral stuff, the way your mind processes information and emotions becomes too severe, and now you can't function. So what I've noticed with this protocol is I did create it for somebody like me who has severe mental health, multiple stacked mental health issues with trauma, multiple addictions, executive functioning problems. I made it for these people here, people like me. But it's most effective for people here who have the resilience, who have more functionality.
Hmm.
And so this goes back to the generational trauma thing. So there are people, that's why I tell the parents, if I were to work with your son, yes, I could do this protocol and all. But the first thing I would actually say to them is, you got to have a stable foundation for managing your mental health outside of this, because this is not, I tell them, this is not the only thing that I do. I take psych meds that I need. I have a support group that I need. I need a lot of free time during my day in case I have a traumatic event doing something very menial like yard work and something happens and I need to sit down to calm down. This is, yeah. So I realized, and I tell people, what this protocol does is it resolves unresolved core emotions that um, drive egoic defensiveness, controlling behaviors, egoic, like when you get into arguments, no, that's unresolved core emotions or trauma energy. It and it resolves that to a great degree. Like people tell me, it's hard to quantify, but I say, like, does it feel like it's 80, 90% gone? Yes. It feels like it's 90% gone. The emotion is like a blip rather than this huge thing, and it doesn't control me anymore. That's what they usually say. What I tell them is, though, it doesn't. get rid of the way your brain was designed. So an ADHD, autism, PTSD brain is just naturally much more reactive, jittery, still has intense emotions. It doesn't get rid of that. So the analogy that I use is sort of like diabetes. You know, it doesn't get rid of if you're type 1 diabetes, your body just doesn't naturally produce enough insulin. It doesn't get rid of that. What it gets rid of is your relationship to it. It gets rid of how you feel about yourself, the kind of ego that it creates. When your brain has these emotional dysregulation condition, it creates an ego that's very defensive, takes things personally, and gets depressed really fast. And is very, gets very angry very quickly and very blamey and stuff. And so it deflates all the energy of that down so the ego is much more manageable, but it doesn't get rid of how your brain was designed. Does that make sense?
That makes sense. And also, I think the recognition, the self-knowledge that you have those conditions helps you then take a step back in that moment to
Yes.
understand, oh, that's what's going on.
And that was huge. There was two things that really helped. One was the mental health diagnosis. Like some people do say, like, I don't like labels. I don't, please don't use labels. Let's not label people, please. Or isn't everybody autistic or something like that? And when I hear that, that tells me that that person believes that these mental health conditions are a problem. They think it's a problem. I mean, I can see why they would think it's a problem. Their son can't keep a job, or the daughter's getting divorced all the time. Like I could see why they think it's a problem. But I tell
Right.
them, for me, being assessed and having, knowing ADHD and autism isn't a problem. It's a description. Now I know why my brain has time management issues, or gets distracted, or gets too emotional, or processes information differently than everybody else. Now I know because it's been a documented, quantified, recorded thing that this is if you're autistic, you tend to have these features. And like, oh, it's like saying, if you have a hybrid car or a totally gas-powered car, it's going to act like this under certain kind of conditions. Oh, I didn't realize that. And you accept it, and that's it. So that's why the diagnosis was so important to me, because otherwise my ego was just saying, this is all my fault. I just need to keep doing better. And I wasn't. It wasn't getting better. Over 30 years, it just wasn't getting better. And I realized when I got the diagnosis, I realized it was never a problem. It was just the way God designed my brain. And so that was one way I helped to calm me. The other way, honestly, was the spiritual. But I do want to talk about a little bit here in this talk. And I do have this in one of the videos. I feel that the whole idea of generational trauma is actually written into the Christian Bible. There's like two areas in the Christian Bible where they mention sins of the father. That's the exact line. Sins of the father will be visited upon their children. Meaning, whatever the father or the parents didn't resolve gets passed to the child. What does that sound like? It's generational trauma. And so I feel the Bible was talking about that there are certain people. So there are certain people in which the best they can do is manage it. And I always tell parents or that individual, do your best to be functional, have a happy life. I never want you to feel like I should just give up or use it as an excuse. That's one thing that people are scared of with these diagnoses. Well, I don't want to use it because they're just going to say it's my ADHD and just not even try. No, I would never tell anybody that. I would never tell anybody use it as an excuse. It's still your job to manage it. Because I would tell them, you try that. Try continuing to tell your kid or your wife, oh, it's my ADHD, my autism that I'm doing this thing that pisses you off and I don't stop doing it. People like that, they get divorced, like me. Or their kids don't talk to them anymore, which I've met people like that. Their kids don't talk to them anymore. So you got to manage it. You have to. It's your responsibility. It's like saying you're diabetic, type 1 diabetic, and constantly going into buffets with people and passing out and then blaming them. Like, you got to manage it. If not, and stuff. So when it's that severe, though, it's not a problem. Life, the universe, or God, you can say, has built in to the human species a way to purge unresolved trauma in children, knowing that almost every child is going to be traumatized in some way because the parents just don't know. Even when you're doing your best to not traumatize your child, you can traumatize your child. So God, life, human biology developed a way to purge this out through individuals like me. Thus, sins of the father and people dying for the misunderstanding. Like people like us, we're dying out there. We have addictions, we have mental health issues, we commit suicide all on a higher level than the average population. So we are literally dying out there for the misunderstandings of our fathers, of our mothers. And I'm not blaming them. They just didn't know. They're missing the point and stuff. So what's interesting is the Greek term for missing the point or missing the target is sin. And so, again, you can clearly see this generational trauma thing to me was written into the Bible. So, getting back to the thing with my daughter, when I experienced that strong emotion, at no point did I say to myself, you know, you're messed up, or this means, all the work that you did is for nothing, or like I wasn't thinking the old way that I was thinking. It was terrible, it was dramatic, it was intense, but it was like I was riding a wave, watching it peak and go down. And it was very, very painful doing it, but there was an acceptance of it. The reason you're experiencing it almost on this crazily intense level is because of the generational trauma, because of the sins of the father. You are the purge. So, in many people in the family, including mine, there are people who are the purge of this generational trauma. They end up with these multiple stacked mental health conditions and addictions. And then there's usually a sibling that's generally fine, much more functional, no problem. Why? Because all the generational trauma of the parents went into that child and not this one. And so, in a way, this child, as they grow up, they're ensuring that this genetic line will continue by becoming the purge of all of this. And so, they said that, Jesus saved the world. In a way, people like us help humanity to continue going because we're the purge of that genetically.
Let me make sure I understand it, not necessarily having that kind of spiritual background. So Mary, living in this oppressed land, Romans, kind of like subjugating them, blah, blah, blah. And Jesus is breaking that cycle by not returning hate, not, I guess, enacting harm to people who are harming him. So he has suffered on behalf of, in this case, all of everyone, but he's breaking that generational trauma.
Yeah,
He's
you can say
ending the
even from his
cycle.
family line,
Yeah.
it's a hard time back then. People didn't live as long. People, it's pretty common for a child to see death. So, um, just in his own genetic line, he must have had generational trauma, but he was the purge. Yeah, he died at a young age. He died a terrible death in which he was suffering.
But he
And
didn't
he
pass it
even,
on.
yeah, it's even written into the Bible that he realized what was happening, but and just begged God to not do this to him. Like, please let this cup pass from me, is the line from the Bible. Meaning, it sounded to me like he knew what was happening and just was begging God, like, please don't let this happen to me. Yeah. And so, but he followed through with it. He, died on the cross, thus saving his genetic line, or just, in the way we help the human species to move forward because we're the purge.
Yep. Makes sense.
And
Cool.
I should also say one more thing about Mary and stuff. So again, I work with parents with this because you brought up Mary and all. The whole Mary Jesus relationship is a very interesting one because I sort of explain the generational trauma thing to parents. A lot of them are Christian because I do it mostly in America here, and a lot of people here are Christian. They understand generational trauma. When I relate it to the Bible, they could see it. And then so I tell them, your child is sort of like the sacrificial lamb that Jesus was. That's why they're not as functional. But their brother is very functional. They have a child and they're able to have a family and stuff like that because this person was the sacrificial lamb of all the generational trauma. You, I tell the parents, usually the mother, you're like Mary. Meaning you're being told that this, your child's situation. They may only have a limited level of functioning. I cannot promise to you that we can find the exact right formula and stop them doing their addiction so they won't die. There is no formula for recovery. The only formula is you got to keep on trying. That's the only formula and try different things out. And so, like Mary, so in the Bible, it was announced to Mary in the Immaculate Conception, I'm not trying to argue historical facts here. It's just what this book says. It was announced to her what was going to happen. You're going to be giving birth to a child that's going to save humanity, but in doing so, you're going to watch this child suffer, and they're going to die, and you're going to watch them die, and they will die. Obviously, you're going to survive your child. And Mary knew this the entire time. Imagine any parent knowing this about their child. You're going to watch them suffer throughout their lives, and they're going to die a horrible, suffering death, and you're just going to have to watch it, and you know you're going to survive your child, which is the opposite of what every parent wants. And Mary constantly had to, probably on a daily basis, give her will up to God. Because I'm pretty sure when she knew that, you'd think the reality of it. Jesus, we have to pack your bags. We have to move to Mexico because this is a really bad place. You're not going to survive here. Let's go to the Bahamas. No, she stayed there, knowing that this was going to happen and stuff. So in a way, parents of people with generational trauma, when they understand this, and this is why they need just as much solace, comfort, and peace in their lives, possibly more than their child. I've definitely met parents who have medical conditions, ulcers, stress-related conditions from dealing with this mental health addiction situation as well. So I just wanted to add the biblical reference in there includes the parents. Mary, the whole Mary and Jesus relationship was one of huge sacrifice to the will of God, which is, you could say, life, the way life is. This is the way life is.
That's great. Were there any comments that you wanted to address before we wrap? Anything else?